Alright, today on Quick Hits, we only have two topics I really want to hit on. A little NBA, a little something that has to do with sports and movies. But I wanted to start with this. So, NBA.com writers, editors, they claimed they had a panel of people get together and make this list. They came out with the all-decade team for the 2010s, even though the decade technically isn't over yet. I guess they want content to fill up the off-season. Because, August, nothing's going on in the NBA. But I have a specific issue with this all-decade team. Let me just read you the first all-decade 2010s team. Stephen Curry, makes sense, two-time MVP award winner. LeBron James, best player of the decade. Kevin Durant, arguably the second best player of the decade. Kawhi Leonard, either the second or third best player in the decade. Even though he was drafted a few years into the decade, he still has had a massive impact on the decade with 2 Finals MVPs and 2 NBA championships. But then they got James Harden on here. And you may ask, well, Josh, what's your beef with James Harden? My beef with James Harden is that for as talented of a basketball player he is, his evolution as a basketball player has really only apexed in the last few years of this last decade. There's an obsession among people in the media, whether it is people who cover the NBA every day, or they cover it from the outside looking in, or just people who look at the NBA through the lens of playing video games, or it's the perspective of people who only care about stats. They act like James Harden is greater than he actually is. We've heard coaches refer to him as the best scoring player of all time. He's the most talented scorer. They use all these superlatives with him, but yet nobody actually criticizes him. And I've been called a James Harden hater. Look, you can call him whatever you want. I don't care. But let me tell you something. James Harden has specific elements of his game that would not translate to any other era of basketball. And his skill set in and of itself is dependent on these aspects of his game functioning. First of all, there's been numerous cases documented where he travels, okay? He has not been called for walking with the basketball. He has not been called for extra steps. And I'm not talking about like 1 step here or possibly even 2 steps for a dunk. I'm talking about his step backs. I'm talking about his drives down the lane, where he's carrying the basketball. He's not even attempting the dribble, and nobody calls him on it. You never get away with that 10 years ago, 20 years ago. I mean, heck, 30 years ago, if he would have tried that, it would have been called. Someone would have clotheslined him for it. It would have just been called a regular foul. Secondly, James Harden has only become a good defensive player in the last, I want to say 12 to 20 months. Before that, he was a mediocre to poor to miserable defensive player. Also, he's only become this efficient offensive weapon under Mike D'Antoni. Before D'Antoni got to Houston, James Harden was not this efficient. He was not this impactful of a scorer. He was talented, he could score, he could shoot, but he wasn't able to do it at this high level. So you got to wonder, is it a byproduct of D'Antoni? Is it Harden coming into his prime at the same time he has D'Antoni? Which is it? It's the chicken or the egg argument, right? Well, which came first? Is it Harden or is it the coach? You look at this list of people and look who's second team. Chris Paul, Russell Westbrook, third team, Dwayne Wade, Kobe Bryant. These are all guards. You're going to tell me that James Harden is that much better than Russell Westbrook? James Harden has 7 All-Star appearances and 6 All-NBAs during the decade. Russell Westbrook has 8 All-Star appearances and 8 All-NBA teams. Russell Westbrook averaged a triple-double for back-to-back seasons and won a league MVP. James Harden didn't do that. James Harden won MVP, but he didn't average triple-double. Westbrook has been recognized by the fans, the coaches, and the writers and his peers as a more consistent, better player throughout the decade than James Harden. Furthermore, Russell Westbrook, 23 points per game, Harden 24. Negligible, 1 point difference. Westbrook, 8 assists per game. Harden, 6.2 assists per game. Westbrook's getting more assists. Oh, and by the way, Harden, 5.2 rebounds per game. Westbrook, 7.3 rebounds per game. So Westbrook's stats outlie him to be better than Harden. His accolades are better than Harden. And neither one has won an NBA title. In fact, you think about Russell Westbrook, has he played with better or worse talent than James Harden? You could say it's a toss-up. If you swap Westbrook and Harden, do both teams have the same results in the win-loss column? Probably. But there's an obsession with James Harden to say that he is so much better than the guys because of stats. Even though the stats show that Westbrook and Harden are on the same level. Because he puts up crazy amounts of points. Because he's got the beard. Because he's got charisma. And he's a media darling. The media loves him. They are nowhere as hypercritical of Harden as they are of Westbrook. Let me give you the other player I mentioned who's on this list, who is not first team. And I don't know if he should be first team, but I just want to bring it up. Dwayne Wade. 8 All-Star appearances, 4 All-NBA teams. Now, Harden does have 2 more All-NBA teams than Wade. I understand that Harden is scoring 4 more points per game than Dwayne Wade. They're almost the same number of rebounds. Close to the same number of assists. Basically, Harden has 1.5 more assists than Dwayne Wade. But Dwayne Wade has 2 NBA championships in the decade. One of those championships was when the Miami Heat beat the Oklahoma City Thunder with James Harden, Russell Westbrook, and Kevin Durant. 3 players who are on these All-NBA teams list. Dwayne Wade was on a team with LeBron James that beat 2 players on the first team All-NBA list. I can't believe for 1 second that James Harden is 2 whole first teams better than Dwayne Wade. Dwayne Wade's a surefire Hall of Famer. Dwayne Wade won with LeBron and before LeBron. James Harden has won no NBA titles. So I think when you have a list like this, people are not being critical thinking enough about certain players because everyone has their biases. Look at the guys on the third team. Giannis Antetokounmpo. Giannis was only drafted about 6 years ago. And he's only been a top-tier player in the league the last 2 years. There's no reason why he should be on this list. What has he done? What has Giannis done aside from a 2-year reign of period in this decade? You're telling me that Giannis is really an all-decade player in a decade where he was only one of the best players in the league for about a 2.5-year period? That's just silly. Meanwhile, Chris Bosh did more in the 2010s, winning NBA titles, all-star selections, than Giannis did. But we forget about Chris Bosh because it's out of sight, out of mind. We so conveniently forget the past. And this is why when people have these arguments about who's the best player, who's the greatest at this, who's the best at that, you forget context. You forget history. People are so quick to forget who is great, not just based on the last thing you saw, not just based on your favorite stat, not just based on whatever subjective tinted glasses that you're looking through at the world to come to your conclusion. The fact that James Harden is first team all decade and Giannis is third team all decade, and I have a list here that does not have Chris Bosh at all. I have a list here that doesn't even acknowledge him. Look, you want to argue that Kobe and Dwayne Wade should be higher? Let's do it. I'm all for that debate. You want to argue that Harden and Westbrook should be swapped like I did? Let's go. Let's do it. But you're telling me that you couldn't put Chris Bosh on this list? Really? That's slippery. 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now, when people look back on the history of the game, they're going to be making judgments on these all-decade teams, on these all-NBA teams, on these all-star appearances. And people are going to wonder what on earth people were thinking. Because you look now back at the 80s and the 90s, and you realize some of the guys who got all-star nominations and some of the guys who got all-NBA appearances, and you're wondering why. And it's not just because you're looking back on it from the outside looking in. You're asking that question because when you see the replays of NBA games, you realize some of these guys were really not that good. And it's not just because they were good in their era. It's because some of this stuff is a popularity contest. Is James Harden really better than Russell Westbrook? Or is he more liked than Russell Westbrook? Is Giannis really deserving to be on an all-decade team when he only has 3 all-star appearances in a 10-year period? He's only been playing in the league for 6 of the years of the decade? Or is it just because he's a likable guy and a lot of people think highly of him and they know he's the future of the league? Lists like this, exasperating. All right, one more thing before I get out of here. So we had a topic on 97.3 ESPN today about, the question was asked, who is the greatest fictional movie quarterback of all time? And we drew the line at, you can't have a quarterback who's based on a real life. So like, remember the Titans, Ronnie Sunshine Bass, based on a real person. The movie, based on a real team. Can't be on the list. So we threw out a lot of names. I know people brought up Burt Reynolds' character from The Longest Yard, Paul Crewe. People brought up Shane Falco. People brought up Johnny Utah from Point Break. A lot of names were brought up. And, it was said partially tongue-in-cheek that, I literally broke down every quarterback. I'm breaking down how good they are, how well they threw the ball, how realistic the movie was. And people, Ryan Rothstein, shout out to Ryan here, he said, I'm the greatest fictional athlete analyst of all time. And, well, look, I'll run with that title. I'll rock with that. But there's a reason why I can break these things down. Because I'm already doing it for everything else. When I watch a football game, I'm already breaking that down. So what makes a movie any different? Look, let's be realistic. If you think that Burt Reynolds, character Paul Crewe, was the greatest fictional quarterback of all time, you're insane. Number one, the movie was very era-specific. Paul Crewe was an option quarterback. He was a phenomenal athlete. In the last 25 to 30 years of the NFL, he would have not been a quarterback. He would have probably been a running back in college and the NFL. But because of his era, he was penciled in as a quarterback. You can tell me he has all the intangibles you want, but there's a lot of guys who have intangibles. People overlook guys like Shane Falco because Replacements was partially a parody movie. But Keanu Reeves was legitimately out there throwing that football. People overlook Willie Beeman in Any Given Sunday because a lot of people didn't like Any Given Sunday. They thought the movie was extreme and it was excessive. But Willie Beeman was a phenomenal athlete. He was a phenomenal quarterback. He could throw the ball, he could run the ball. People overlooked the game plan with The Rock, Joe Kingman, because it wasn't a real football movie. It was a Disney movie. It was a feel-good movie. It really wasn't that much about football. Football just happened to be part of the movie. Kingman was basically the most athletic, the most strong-armed, the most clutch quarterback in the league, and nobody was close. But we don't talk about certain quarterbacks because it goes back to the conversation about this list. People tend to analyze things based on their own subjective point of view when they walk into something. So with movies, it could be nostalgia. It could involve your favorite actor. It could be a movie that you saw with your friends, your parents, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your husband, your wife. The movie could have some sentimental value to you. And then another movie may have an actor that you don't like. What if you don't like Keanu Reeves? What if you don't like Jamie Foxx? What if you don't like a director? Or what if you didn't like a screen that you saw the movie in, whether maybe it was an older movie and the screen didn't have the best quality? You're not being objective. And that's the same thing problem with lists like this. People are not being objective. And the problem is that in the world of sports, we confuse subjective and objective. I'm telling you right now, if you want to at me at Josh Hennig on Twitter, I broke this whole thing down of who is the better quarterback. I'm telling you right now, nobody talks about Kurt Russell's quarterback all those years ago. Nobody likes to talk about some of these guys because at the end of the day, like Joe Kingman, because it wasn't a movie that you remember a lot. It doesn't, another movie that goes into your category. Look, Hightower, Kurt Russell's character, was actually a really good quarterback. Smart, good throwing arm, got it all done, and he did it 13 years after the fact in his prime. But don't want to talk about that because that wasn't their favorite movie. Or that was the movie that they have an emotional attachment, a certain amount of sentiment with. When analyzing athletes, when analyzing movies, when having these conversations that we all like to have, at some point we have to realize in our mind that we have to differentiate. We have to separate the subjectivity with the objectivity. So, the conclusion, James Harden shouldn't be first team All-NBA, Giannis shouldn't be on any of these lists, and Burt Reynolds is an overrated movie quarterback. At Josh Hennig on Twitter. I'll catch you next time.